This story begins where so many others end, with a piece of paper. But it was not a bill, not a court order, not a final notice. It was a letter written in the clumsy, determined crayon scrawl of a 7-year-old girl who had run out of options. A letter tucked into a worn, unsealed envelope, addressed not to a person, but to a place, a grimy, formidable clubhouse that the rest of the city pretended did not exist. That letter, a desperate prayer on folded paper, found its way into the calloused, scarred hand of a man named Silas Blackwood, known to the world as Bear, the president of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. After reading its heartbreaking plea, he made a single phone call. And in response, over 300 of the most feared men in the state fired up their engines, their collective roar a promise of thunder to come. They were not riding for territory or for profit or for vengeance. They were riding for a little girl they had never met, to wage war against a faceless corporation that had made the fatal mistake of trying to put a price on a human life. And what happened next would prove, once and for all, that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather, and their halos are forged in chrome and steel. The cold was a thief. It stole the breath from Lily's lungs, leaving a painful, icy ache in its place. It stole the feeling from her fingertips, turning them into clumsy, numb things that could barely hold the precious envelope. It crept through the thin fabric of her coat, a coat that was a size too small in a season too late, and settled deep in her bones. She was 7 years old, but in that moment, huddled in the mouth of a downtown alley, she felt as ancient and as brittle as the frozen litter skittering across the pavement around her. The city was a monster of stone and glass, roaring with a constant, indifferent noise. Cars hissed by on the wet streets, their headlights cutting fleeting, ghostly shapes in the descending dusk. The world was full of people, thousands of them, rushing home to warmth and light and dinner. But here, in the shadows, there was only Lily, and the cold and the mission. Her father, her wonderful, strong, funny father, had called them the kings of the city. Not the men in suits who lived in the tall, gleaming towers, but the other ones. The ones who rode loud, shining machines and wore jackets like armor. "They're not what people think, Lilybug," he had told her once, his voice a low rumble as he tinkered with the engine of an old pickup. "They look scary, but they have a code. They protect their own." Her own. That was the phrase that had echoed in her small head for days, a desperate drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. Her daddy was in the hospital. He was one of their own, and he needed protecting. So she had taken the crayons, the good ones, the big box of 64 that he had given her for her birthday, and she had written the letter. Her handwriting was wobbly, the letters big and round, some facing the wrong way. She had told them everything, about the accident at the construction site where he'd been working a side job, about the long, quiet weeks in the hospital room that smelled of bleach and sadness. And she had told them about the new doctor, the one with the tight, thin smile and the clipboard that was like a judge's gavel. She had told them how he had spoken to her mommy in the hallway, his voice low but sharp, using words Lily did not understand, but whose meaning she felt with a chilling certainty. Words like non-responsive and futility of care and financial liability. Then yesterday, the worst word of all, a word she had heard her mommy whisper into the phone, her voice choked with sobs that she tried to hide. Termination. They were going to stop. They were going to stop helping her daddy. They were going to let him go. Not because he could not get better, but because they had run out of money. The thought was so monstrous, so fundamentally wrong, that her 7-year-old mind could not fully grasp it. It was like being told the sun would no longer rise because no one had paid the bill. Her mommy was broken. Lily could see it. She had cried until she had no more tears, until she was just a hollowed-out shell, sitting by the window and staring at nothing. The fight had gone out of her, but not out of Lily. She clutched the envelope tighter. On the front, she had drawn a picture of a motorcycle, with a big, smiling man on it who had a beard like her dad's. Underneath, she had written, "To the kings at the Big Bike Clubhouse." It was a leap of faith into the dark, a child's prayer mailed to the last address she could think of. She had slipped out of the apartment while her mother slept the exhausted sleep of the defeated. She had walked for what felt like hours, following the vague directions her dad had once given a friend on the phone, a conversation she had filed away with the uncanny memory of a child who listens to everything. The alley stank of garbage and despair. A gust of wind, sharp as a razor, whipped down the narrow canyon of brick, making her gasp. It tore at the envelope in her hand, trying to rip it away. "No," she whispered, her voice a tiny puff of white in the frigid air. She hugged it to her chest, shielding it with her body. This was all she had left. This one piece of paper. This one impossible hope. She had to find them. She had to make them understand. Her father had said they protect their own. She was small. She was cold. She was terrified. But she was her father's daughter. And her father was one of them. Stepping out of the alley and back into the biting wind, she set her jaw, a perfect miniature of her father's stubborn expression. The kings of the city. She would find them. She had to. The building was not just a building. It was a fortress. A squat, two-story block of weathered brick and boarded-up windows, crouched at the end of a desolate industrial street. There were no signs, no welcoming lights. Just a heavy steel door, painted matte black, with a small, stylized skull and wrench logo spray-painted beside it. It looked less like a clubhouse and more like a place where things ended. A row of motorcycles was parked out front, hulking metal beasts sleeping under the sickly orange glow of a single street lamp. They were enormous, far bigger than the pictures in her books, gleaming with chrome that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. They looked like armored animals, dangerous even in stillness. Lily's courage, which had burned so brightly on her long walk, flickered and threatened to go out. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a tiny cage. This was it. This was the place her dad had spoken of with a strange mix of reverence and regret. The Iron Saints MC. From inside, she could hear the low thud of heavy music and a rumble of deep voices, like a gathering of bears. It was a sound of immense power, of a world that had no place for a little girl in a pink coat. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back to the relative safety of the anonymous city streets, to go home and crawl into bed and pretend this was all a nightmare. But then she saw her father's face in her mind, pale and still against the white hospital pillow, a tube taped to his mouth. She remembered the rhythmic, mournful beep of the machine beside his bed, the machine they were going to turn off. The image was a spur, driving her forward. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. She took a deep breath, the frozen air searing her lungs, and walked up the 3 concrete steps to the black steel door. There was no doorbell, no knocker. Just a solid, unforgiving slab of metal. She was so small she could not even reach the handle. So she did the only thing she could. She balled up her numb little fist and she knocked on the door, the sound a pathetic thump, thump, thump against the immense, rumbling life within. Nothing happened. The music and the voices continued unabated. She knocked again, harder this time, putting her whole body into it. Her knuckles stung with the impact, the pain a distant, dull signal. Still nothing. Tears of frustration pricked at the corners of her eyes, freezing almost instantly on her lashes. It was a stupid plan, a little girl's fantasy. They couldn't hear her. They would never hear her. Just as she was about to give up, to slide down the cold brick wall and let the despair finally swallow her whole, the door screeched open. A giant filled the doorway. He was the biggest man Lily had ever seen, taller than her father, wider than a refrigerator. A wild black beard spilled down his chest, braided with silver rings. His arms, bare despite the cold, were a tapestry of swirling, intricate tattoos, dragons and skulls and flames that seemed to writhe in the dim light. He wore a leather vest covered in patches, the largest of which was a grim, snarling wolf's head. His eyes set deep beneath a heavy brow, narrowed as they looked down and finally found her. They were dark, hard eyes, chips of obsidian that seemed to see right through her. The music from inside sputtered and died. The rumbling voices fell silent. It was as if her very presence had short-circuited the building's power. The giant did not speak. He just stared. Behind him, other figures emerged from the gloom, more huge men, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion, a sea of leather and denim and beards. Lily's entire body trembled, an uncontrollable shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She felt like a field mouse staring up at a parliament of owls. She had their attention, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. The lead giant finally spoke, his voice a low growl, like stones grinding together. "You lost, little girl." Lily couldn't find her voice. Her throat was tight, her tongue a dry stone in her mouth. All the words she had practiced on her long walk here, the brave and desperate speech she had composed, they all vanished. Instead, her hand, shaking violently, held up the envelope. The giant's gaze dropped to the crumpled piece of paper. He did not move to take it. He just stared, his expression unreadable. From the back of the silent crowd, another voice, calmer and deeper than the first, cut through the tension. "What is it, Prospect?" Another man stepped forward, parting the silent bikers like a ship through water. He was even bigger than the first man. If the man at the door was a giant, this one was a mountain. His hair and beard were more gray than black, and a long, jagged scar cut down from his left temple, disappearing into the thicket of his beard. He was not just big, he was solid, a figure of immense, rooted authority. His vest had more patches than the others, and the central one on his back was the same skull and wrench as the logo outside, only larger, more detailed, more menacing. This was the king. Lily knew it instantly. He stopped in front of her, blocking out the light from the clubhouse, casting her in his enormous shadow. He crouched down, a slow, deliberate movement, his knees cracking like tree branches. He brought himself down to her level, and the effect was even more intimidating. Now she could see the lines etched around his eyes, the hard-won wisdom and weariness in his face. "What have you got there, little one?" he asked. His voice was not a growl. It was a deep, quiet rumble, the sound of the earth itself. Lily found a tiny sliver of her courage. She took a shuddering breath and pushed the envelope toward him. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, sir." Her gaze was fixed on his face, pleading. She did not look at the tattoos, or the vest, or the scar. She looked into his eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, like a winter sky, and in their depths, she saw not cruelty, but a profound stillness. He looked at her, then at the envelope, then back at her. For a long moment, the entire world seemed to hang in the balance, suspended in the space between a terrified little girl and the president of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. Then, with a hand the size of a dinner plate, he gently, carefully took the letter from her. Silas Bear Blackwood took the envelope. It felt absurdly light and fragile in his massive, calloused hand, a thing from another world. He could feel the child's trembling through the thin paper. He had seen grown men, hard men, men who lived by the knife and the gun, tremble less than this little girl. He ran his thumb over the front, over the wobbly crayon drawing of a motorcycle. He felt a strange, unfamiliar pang in his chest, a feeling he had not had in years. Amusement, maybe. Pity. It was hard to say. The clubhouse, his sanctuary, had been breached by a creature of pure, unadulterated innocence. It was so bizarre, it was almost funny. He looked down at the girl. She was watching him, her big brown eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Her face was smudged with dirt and streaked with frozen tears. She was the picture of vulnerability, a lost lamb who had wandered into a den of wolves. "All right, little one," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Let's see what this is all about." He tore the envelope open with a surprising delicacy, his thick fingers clumsy, but careful not to rip the letter inside. He unfolded the paper. It was a sheet torn from a child's drawing pad, the lines faint on the back, and he began to read. The words were printed in a rainbow of crayon colors. "Dear Kings, my name is Lily. My daddy is Johnny Miller. He told me you were kings. He said you protect your own. My daddy needs protecting." Bear's expression, a carefully constructed mask of neutral authority, did not change, but inside something shifted. Johnny Miller. The name was a ghost, a memory from a different era of the club, a kid they had called Sparky, full of fire and talent, the best damn mechanic they had ever seen. He had been a prospect, on the verge of patching in, a guaranteed lifer. And then he had met a girl, fallen in love, and chosen a different path. He had walked away. Most of the younger members wouldn't even know the name. But Bear knew. He had been the one to shake Sparky's hand and wish him well, hiding his own disappointment. He kept reading. He is in the hospital. He had an accident. He is sleeping and won't wake up. My mommy is crying all the time. A man in a suit came. He said we have no more money. He said they are going to turn off the machine tomorrow. The casual cruelty of the child's words hit Bear like a physical blow. Turn off the machine. He could feel the collective breath of his men being held behind him. The silence in the clubhouse was no longer one of curiosity. It was heavy, tense. Please, you have to help. Daddy said you are family. He is Johnny Sparky Miller. He said you'd remember. He said the wrench is the key. Bear's eyes fell to the bottom of the page. Beneath the last wobbly sentence, there was a small drawing, done in a greasy black crayon. It was a simple, stylized drawing of an open-ended wrench. And everything changed. It was not just a drawing. It was a signature, a mark, Sparky's mark. He used to draw it on everything he fixed, a little guarantee of quality. It was the symbol he had proposed for his own patch, back when he was prospecting. The wrench is the key. It was a phrase they had used back then, a bit of workshop slang. The wrench is the key to making the engine roar. The wrench is the key to fixing what's broken. This letter was not a plea from a stranger. It was a call from family. A brother, long lost but never forgotten, was in trouble. His little girl, his legacy, was standing in the cold, begging for help. And the system, the cold, faceless world of money and suits, was about to execute him over a debt. The faint amusement Bear had felt was gone, burned away by a sudden white-hot rage. It was a cold fury, familiar and focused. This was not just an injustice. It was a violation of the code. Their code. You protect your own. The world snapped into sharp, brutal focus. The mission was clear. The enemy was defined. He slowly, carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the inner pocket of his vest, placing it over his heart. It felt as heavy and as sacred as the club charter itself. Then he looked at Lily, really looked at her. He saw the grime and the fear, but now he saw something else. He saw her father's stubborn jaw. He saw the iron will that had driven her across a frozen city on an impossible quest. This was not just a child. This was Sparky's daughter. She was made of the same steel as her father. She was one of them. His expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing. The mountain shifted, becoming not a threat, but a shelter. He knelt again, his gaze level with hers. The full force of his presence, his authority as president of the Iron Saints, was now focused on this one small child, not as a threat, but as a shield. Lily, he said, and her name in his deep voice was a solemn vow. My name is Bear, and I remember your daddy. He reached out, his hand moving slowly so as not to frighten her, and gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. His touch was surprisingly soft. You did good coming here, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated through her. You did the right thing. He leaned in a little closer, and the promise he made was not just to her, but to the memory of her father, to the silent men behind him, and to the very soul of his club. I promise you, little one, he vowed, his winter blue eyes holding hers. We will handle this. Your daddy is one of us, and we do not leave family behind. Ever. A collective sigh seemed to pass through the men crowded in the doorway. The tension broke, replaced by a low, dangerous murmur of agreement. A decision had been made. A line had been drawn. Lily stared at him, her lip trembling. She did not understand all the undercurrents, the history, the code. She only understood the look in his eyes. It was a look she had seen in her own father's eyes. It was the look of absolute, unconditional protection. For the first time in weeks, a tiny, fragile bud of hope began to bloom in the frozen wasteland of her heart. And then she did something that shocked every man there. She launched herself forward and wrapped her small arms around Bear's massive neck, burying her face in the worn, leather-scented fabric of his vest. She sobbed, great, heaving, cathartic sobs of a child who had carried an impossible burden for too long and had finally been allowed to set it down. Bear froze for a second, startled. Then his huge arms, arms that could snap a man's spine, came up and enveloped her in a gentle, secure embrace. He held her as if she were made of spun glass, patting her back with a slow, rhythmic motion. Over her small, shaking head, his eyes met those of his sergeant-at-arms, a man called Cutter. The message in Bear's gaze was clear and cold as ice. War was coming. The moment was broken by a soft command from Bear. "Jax, get her something warm, now!" One of the bikers, a younger man with kind eyes, nodded sharply and disappeared back into the clubhouse. Bear gently disentangled Lily from his neck. "Come on inside, little one. You're shaking like a leaf." He scooped her up effortlessly, her entire body barely bigger than one of his arms. She was shockingly light. As he turned and walked into the clubhouse, the bikers parted for him like the Red Sea. The inside was a cavern of wood, leather, and smoke. A massive, rough-hewn bar dominated one wall, and a fire roared in a huge stone hearth on the other. It was warm, overwhelmingly so after the biting cold outside. Bear carried her over to a big cracked leather armchair by the fire and set her down gently. She sank into its depths, the worn leather enveloping her. Jax returned with a steaming mug and a thick, heavy wool blanket. He handed the mug to Bear, who held it for a moment to make sure it was not too hot before passing it to Lily. "Hot chocolate," Bear said, "with extra marshmallows." Lily took the mug in both hands, the warmth seeping into her frozen fingers. It was the best thing she had ever felt. She took a tentative sip. It was sweet and rich, and it spread a welcome heat all through her chest. Jax draped the heavy blanket over her. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else. Something that smelled like safety. Another biker, an older, wiry man with a long gray ponytail, approached. "Bear, the kid's coat is soaked. And those shoes." He pointed at Lily's worn canvas sneakers, which were dark with melted slush. Bear nodded. "Doc, see what you can do." The man named Doc knelt in front of her. He had a gentler face than the others, lined with concern. "Hey there, little bit. Let's get these wet things off you before you catch a chill, okay?" He carefully unzipped her thin coat and helped her out of it, then gently untied her soggy shoelaces and slipped off her sneakers and wet socks. He took a dry bar towel and meticulously dried her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. Someone else appeared with a thick pair of wool socks, big enough to go up to her knees, and a huge fleece-lined club sweatshirt that swallowed her whole. Lily sat there, wrapped in a blanket, wearing a sweatshirt that smelled like a warm giant, sipping the best hot chocolate in the world. For the first time, she noticed the other men. They were keeping their distance, giving her space, but they were all watching. Their faces were no longer hard and suspicious. They were grim, set, but their eyes, when they looked at her, held a new light. It was a fierce, protective possessiveness. She was no longer an intruder. She was a treasure, a cause. Bear had not moved from his spot beside her chair. He watched her drink the chocolate, a silent, brooding mountain of a man. His mind, however, was miles away, spinning with cold, calculated rage. He was planning, strategizing. The initial shock had passed, replaced by the focused calm that always preceded action. He pulled out his phone. The device looked like a child's toy in his hand. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb moving with decisive precision. He stopped at a single entry. "Cutter." He pressed the call button. The phone did not even have a chance to ring once. "Yeah, Bear." Cutter's voice came through, gravelly and immediate. He was standing 10 feet away, but this was how they did things. Official business. Bear did not waste a single word. His voice was low, flat, and devoid of any emotion except absolute command. "Code Black," he said. There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. A code black had not been called in over a decade. It was the club's highest state of alert, reserved for only the most dire of threats to the club or its family. It meant drop everything. It meant all hands. It meant war. "For who?" Cutter asked, his voice tight. Bear's eyes flickered to the small girl in the armchair, safe for now, cocooned in their protection. "It's for Sparky," he said. "It's for Sparky's kid." There was no further question, no hesitation. Just a simple two-word reply that sealed the fate of a multi-million-dollar corporation. "On it!" The call ended. Cutter turned to the assembled men in the clubhouse. His voice, unlike Bear's, was a roar. It filled the large room, rattling the glasses behind the bar. "You heard him! Code Black! It's for Sparky! Spread the word! Full chapter mobilization! Now!" The clubhouse erupted. It was not chaos. It was a terrifyingly organized and instantaneous explosion of purpose. Men who had been lounging, drinking, talking, were suddenly in motion. Phones came out. Calls were made, short, terse, and urgent. "Code Black. Prez's order. Rally at the clubhouse, now. It's for Sparky's girl. Move it." The words passed down the phone lines, a digital wildfire spreading through the night. From quiet suburban garages to greasy workshops to late-night bars across 3 counties, the call was answered. Men dropped what they were doing. They kissed their wives and children goodbye, their faces grim. They pulled on their cuts, the leather vests that were their uniform and their identity. They walked out into the cold night and threw a leg over their machines. And one by one, then in pairs, then in dozens, engines began to roar to life. The sound started as a distant, sporadic rumble, like the first hints of a coming storm. But it grew exponentially. It was a low, gut-vibrating thrum that seemed to make the very air tremble. It was the sound of horsepower and anger, the sound of a sleeping giant waking up. Back at the clubhouse, the atmosphere was electric. Men were checking gear, their movements economical and practiced. There was no shouting, no wasted motion, just the grim, determined focus of men with a singular, righteous purpose. Lily watched from the safety of her chair, her eyes wide. The mug of hot chocolate was forgotten in her lap. The sheer scale and speed of the response was beyond her comprehension. She had lit a fuse. Now she was watching the bomb ignite. Bear remained by her side, a fixed point in the whirlwind of activity. He was her anchor. He leaned down, his voice a low counterpoint to the rising storm outside. "Don't you worry about a thing, Lily," he said. "You just rest. We've got it from here." Then he turned and strode toward the door, his long leather coat swirling behind him. He stepped out onto the front porch, into the freezing night air, and he beheld the fruits of his call. The street, once desolate and empty, was now a river of light. Headlights, a torrent of them, poured in from every direction, converging on the clubhouse. The rumble was no longer a rumble. It was a deafening, soul-shaking roar that drowned out every other sound in the city. It was the sound of 300 V-twin engines, a symphony of controlled power. They came in waves, a disciplined, endless procession of chrome and steel. They filled the street, then the adjoining lots, parking in tight, orderly formations that spoke of long practice. A sea of leather washed over the industrial landscape. The skull and wrench patch of the Iron Saints repeated hundreds of times. A unified legion under the sickly orange streetlights. Over 300 men, not just the local chapter. They had come from all over the state, old-timers with gray beards and young bloods with fire in their eyes. They had answered the call, because Code Black was sacred, and because the reason, Sparky's kid, was a cause that resonated deep in the heart of their shared code. Bear stood on the steps, his presence silencing the men as they dismounted and gathered before him. The engines were cut, one by one, until a heavy, expectant silence fell, broken only by the hum of the city and the creak of cooling metal. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on him, waiting. He did not need a megaphone. His voice carried in the cold, clear air, imbued with a power that had nothing to do with volume. "Tonight," he began, his voice low and hard as granite, "the world outside our family reminded us what it is. A world that puts a price on a man's life. A world that would orphan a child over a ledger sheet." He paused, letting the words sink in. A low, angry growl went through the crowd. Johnny Sparky Miller, a brother, lies in a hospital bed, and a corporation, a pack of suits and numbers, has decided he is no longer profitable. They have scheduled the termination of his life support for tomorrow morning. The growl grew louder, a more dangerous, visceral sound now. His daughter, Bear continued, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a cold, precise fury. A little girl 7 years old walked across this city in the freezing cold to find us. She came to us because her father told her we protect our own. He held up the letter. In the dim light, it was just a small white rectangle, but every man there understood its weight. This is her prayer, and we are the answer. The crowd was a tinderbox ready to explode, but Bear held them with his iron will. Now listen to me, and you listen good. This is not a riot. This is an operation. We will move in 2 columns. Column Alpha, with me. We visit the hospital. We will be the guests of St. Catherine's until they remember their oath. Column Bravo, Cutter is your lead. You will pay a visit to the offices of a company called Finch Medical Solutions. They are the ones who signed the order. He looked out over the sea of grim faces, meeting as many eyes as he could. The rules are simple. Rule 1, silence. We let our presence do the talking. When we are in public, we are ghosts. Understood? A unified guttural, yeah, was the response. Rule 2, no violence. I repeat, no violence. Unless you are touched first, you do not raise a hand, you do not raise your voice, you are stone, you are steel, you are a wall they cannot move, and a presence they cannot ignore. We are not a mob, we are a message. He let that sink in. Discipline was the key. Their power was not in their fists, but in their numbers, their unity, their terrifying self-control. Rule 3, we do not leave until this is fixed, not corrected, not delayed, fixed. Johnny Miller's care is to be fully reinstated. The debt is to be erased from existence. We will stand vigil. We will occupy their space. We will be a shadow they cannot shake until they do the right thing. He scanned the crowd one last time. Doc, you're with me. We'll need your head. Rhino, you and your boys have Bravo's flank. No one gets near them. No one. The rest of you know your assignments. He took a deep breath. Sparky was family. His little girl came to us for help. She kept her faith. Now we keep ours. He raised his voice in a final, powerful command that was both a question and a battle cry. Do you ride with me? The answer was a single deafening roar, 300 men shouting as one. It was not a word. It was a promise of righteous retribution. Bear turned without another word and swung his leg over his own bike, a massive, blacked-out machine that seemed an extension of his own will. He fired the engine, and its deep, throaty explosion was the signal. In perfect, disciplined unison, 300 engines roared back to life. The ground itself trembled. The Iron Saints were on the move, and heaven help anyone who stood in their way. The procession split as it hit the main boulevard. 100 bikes, Column Alpha, led by Bear, veered left toward the sterile lights of the hospital district. The remaining 200, a much larger and more intimidating force, continued straight, a river of steel and thunder flowing toward the gleaming, arrogant heart of the downtown business core. St. Catherine's Hospital was an oasis of forced tranquility in the chaotic city night. Its brightly lit lobby was meant to be calming, with its potted plants, comfortable chairs, and soft piped-in music. It was a place of quiet worry and hushed conversations. That tranquility was shattered not by a sound, but by a presence. Bear and his 100 men parked their bikes with practiced precision in the hospital's main parking garage, taking up an entire level. They moved on foot from there, a silent, disciplined phalanx of leather and denim. They did not run. They did not shout. They simply walked, their heavy boots making a soft, rhythmic shuffling on the polished linoleum floors. The lone security guard at the front desk, a man named George who was used to dealing with frantic relatives and the occasional drunk, saw them coming through the glass doors. His eyes went wide. He reached for the phone on his desk, his hands shaking. Bear entered first. He walked directly to the desk. He did not loom over it. He simply stood there, his presence filling the entire lobby. The 100 men of Column Alpha fanned out behind him, lining the walls, standing by the elevators, blocking the entrances. They did not speak. They did not touch anything. They just stood, arms crossed, their faces impassive. 100 silent, leather-clad statues, each one a mountain of controlled menace. The lobby, which had seemed spacious moments before, suddenly felt claustrophobic. The soft music seemed to mock the suffocating tension. A few late-night visitors froze in place, their faces pale with fear. Nurses peered out from behind their stations, their eyes like saucers. George, the security guard, had the phone to his ear, but he could not seem to form words. Bear spoke, his voice calm and low, addressed to the terrified man behind the desk. "We are not here for trouble. We are here for a patient. Johnny Miller." I can't give out patient information," George stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm not asking for information," Bear replied, his voice still level. "I am informing you. We will be staying. We wish to speak to the hospital administrator on duty. She's not available," George lied, his voice cracking. "She is now," Bear said, a hint of steel entering his tone. "You have 2 minutes to get her down here, or we will come up to her." The unspoken threat hung in the air, more potent than any shout. The idea of these 100 men moving through the quiet, sterile halls of the hospital, past sick children and recovering patients, was an image of pure chaos. It was a desecration, and Bear knew it. He was using their own fear of impropriety against them. George fumbled with the phone, his fingers slipping on the buttons. He finally managed to dial the administrator's office. "Ma'am," he squeaked, his voice high with panic, "you need to come down to the lobby, right now." While they waited, Doc, the club's resident medic, a former Army combat surgeon who had seen enough of the world to lose all his illusions, spoke quietly to Bear. "They'll call the cops." "Let them," Bear rumbled back, his eyes never leaving the elevator doors. "We're not breaking any laws, just loitering with extreme prejudice." A few minutes later, the elevator dinged. A woman in a sharp dark blue suit and a pinched expression stepped out. This was Mysteria Henderson, the night administrator. She was a woman who wielded bureaucracy like a weapon and saw patients as line items. She saw the lobby, and her face went from annoyed to ashen. She marched toward Bear, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "What is the meaning of this? This is a hospital. You have no right to be here intimidating my staff and patients." Bear did not rise to her anger. He remained calm, his stillness a stark contrast to her flustered outrage. "Mysteria Henderson, my name is Bear. We are here concerning the scheduled termination of care for patient Johnny Miller." Her eyes narrowed. "Patient care protocols are a confidential matter between the hospital and the patient's family. It is none of your concern." "Johnny Miller is our family," Bear stated, the words simple and absolute. "And his daughter came to us for help. So now it is very much our concern." He took a step closer, his sheer size forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to get on the phone to whoever you need to get on the phone to. You are going to tell them that Mr. Miller's care is to be continued without interruption. You are going to tell them that the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club is assuming full financial responsibility for his treatment, effective immediately." He paused, letting her absorb the shock of that statement. Doc stepped forward holding a briefcase. "We have a cashier's check for $250,000 right here as a deposit, from the club's emergency fund. We can have more by sunrise." Mysteria Henderson was stunned into silence. This was not in any of her procedural manuals. "And while you are making those calls," Bear continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "my men and I will be waiting, some of us here, some of us outside his room. We will stand vigil. We will not eat, we will not sleep, we will not leave until we have confirmation that he is safe and his treatment is secured. We will be silent, we will be respectful, but we will be here." She stared at him, her mind racing. She could call the police, but what would they do? Arrest 100 men for standing quietly? The media would have a field day. Biker gang holds silent vigil for fallen brother after hospital tries to unplug him. The hospital's reputation would be in ruins. Finch Medical Solutions would throw them under the bus in a second. She was trapped, and she knew it. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice weak. "These are highly irregular circumstances," Bear countered. "A man's life is not a line item. A child's father is not a liability. You are in the business of saving lives, Mysteria Henderson. We are here to remind you of that." He gestured to the hallway leading toward the ICU. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Some of us would like to go and sit with our brother. He turned and started walking, Doc at his side. He did not look back to see if she would stop him. He knew she would not. 10 of his men, the oldest and calmest of the group, detached from the main force and followed him, a silent, grim honor guard. The rest remained in the lobby, a silent, immovable wall of leather and resolve. Phase 1 was complete. Meanwhile, 20 blocks away, Column Bravo arrived at their destination. The Finch Tower was a monument to corporate arrogance, a 50-story spire of darkened glass and cold steel that stabbed at the night sky. It was the kind of building designed to make the average person feel small and insignificant. Tonight, it was the building that was about to be made insignificant. Cutter, Bear's sergeant-at-arms, gave a series of sharp hand signals. The 200 bikers moved with the precision of a cavalry unit. They did not block the street entirely. They parked their bikes along the curbs on both sides of the wide avenue in front of the tower, creating a long, menacing canyon of chrome. The line of motorcycles stretched for 3 full city blocks. Then they dismounted, and they stood. They did not chant. They did not carry signs. They formed a silent, multi-layered perimeter on the wide public plaza at the tower's base. Some stood facing the building, arms crossed. Others stood facing the street, a clear message to anyone thinking of interfering. They were a silent army laying siege to a glass castle. The few late-night office cleaners and security personnel inside the tower stared down from the windows, their faces pressed against the glass, their mouths agape. The sight was surreal, terrifying. It was like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. An army of silent, leather-clad warriors had materialized from the night and laid claim to their sterile corporate world. Cutter, along with Rhino, a biker whose neck was as thick as a small tree trunk, and 2 other senior members, walked toward the revolving glass doors of the main entrance. One of the men was carrying a briefcase. He was known only as the Advocate, a brother who had passed the bar exam years ago before deciding he preferred the company of outlaws to lawyers. The 2 security guards inside, seeing them approach, hastily locked the doors. They looked terrified but resolute. Cutter did not try the door. He simply stood in front of it and waited. He pulled out his phone and sent a simple text to Bear. "In position, the castle is dark." The response came a minute later. "The king is in his tower. Top floor. Lights on." Cutter grinned. It was not a pleasant sight. "He's here," he said to the men with him. "Let's go say hello." They walked to a side entrance, a smaller, less conspicuous door used by service personnel. It too was locked. Rhino, without a word, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small professional-grade toolkit. He was not just a bruiser. He had been a master locksmith in a former life. In less than 30 seconds, there was a quiet click. The door was open. They slipped inside, the door closing silently behind them. They were in a service corridor. The Advocate consulted a schematic of the building on his phone, provided minutes earlier by another brother who worked in corporate IT security. "Service elevator is this way," the Advocate whispered. "It has direct access to the executive penthouse floors." They moved through the silent, empty corridors of the building like wraiths. This was their world, the shadows, the places people did not look. They were ghosts in the machine. Alistair Finch, CEO of Finch Medical Solutions, was working late. He liked the quiet of the office after hours. It allowed him to focus on what he loved most, the elegant, brutal purity of numbers. He was reviewing the quarterly projections, a glass of obscenely expensive scotch at his elbow. The numbers were good, very good. Delinquency recovery was up 17%. A significant portion of that was due to his new end-of-life liability mitigation protocol. It was a brilliant, if coldly named, strategy. It convinced hospitals to cut their losses on long-term, high-cost, low-recovery chance patients, freeing up beds, and more importantly, writing off uncollectible debt that his company had purchased for pennies on the dollar. It was a win-win, for the hospital's bottom line and for his. He took a sip of his scotch, savoring the peaty burn. He felt a sense of deep satisfaction. He was a master of his universe, a king in his glass tower, looking down on the sleeping city. A quiet ding from his private elevator startled him. He was not expecting anyone. Security knew better than to come up here without being summoned. The elevator doors slid open. 4 men stepped out into his office. They were not men from his world. They were large, dressed in leather and denim, and they carried with them the cold air of the street and an aura of absolute physical menace. They moved with a predatory grace that was utterly alien to this sterile corporate environment. Finch shot to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the intercom button on his desk. "Who the hell are you? How did you get up here? I'm calling security." Cutter took a step forward. He was smiling that unpleasant grin again. "I wouldn't bother. They're a little busy at the moment. You might want to take a look out your window." Finch, confused and angry, strode to the massive floor-to-ceiling window that made up one wall of his office. He looked down 50 stories, and his blood ran cold. The street below was not a street anymore. It was a military encampment, a sea of men and machines, silent and still, a vast dark stain on the clean grid of the city. The flashing blue and red lights of several police cars were visible at the far end of the blockade, but they were keeping their distance, clearly unwilling or unable to intervene. What is this?" he stammered, the scotch forgotten, his bravado evaporating. "That," Cutter said, his voice dangerously soft, "is a board meeting, and you, Mr. Finch, are the sole item on the agenda." Cutter walked over to Finch's expansive, polished mahogany desk. He looked at the papers, the spreadsheets, the cold calculus of human misery. Then he reached into his own vest pocket. He pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper and placed it gently in the center of the desk, right on top of the quarterly projections. It was Lily's letter. The crayon colors seemed impossibly bright, impossibly innocent in this temple of greed. "We believe this belongs to you," Cutter said. "It's a letter from a new client. Her name is Lily. She's 7. Her father is a man named Johnny Miller. Perhaps you've heard of him? He's on your end-of-life liability mitigation list, account number 734-B. Finch stared at the letter, then back at Cutter, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "How could they possibly know that?" I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice thin. "Oh, I think you do," Cutter said, his smile gone now, his face a hard knot of fury. "You see, Mr. Finch, you made a business decision, a very profitable one, I'm sure. But you made a mistake. You targeted the wrong man. You targeted family." Rhino, the massive biker, stepped up beside Cutter. He did not speak. He just cracked his knuckles. The sound was like gunshots in the quiet office. "This is insane," Finch sputtered, backing away toward his desk. "This is extortion. I'll have you all arrested." The advocate stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He was calm, his voice the epitome of professional reason, which made it all the more terrifying in this context. "It's not extortion, Mr. Finch. It's a negotiation. You hold a debt, a piece of paper that says you are owed money. We, on the other hand, hold a significant, if intangible, asset, the immediate and continued operational capacity of your business." He gestured to the window. "As of right now, no one is entering or leaving this building. The morning shift will not be able to get to work. Your deliveries will not arrive. Your reputation, when the morning news gets a hold of the fact that 200 bikers have laid siege to your headquarters over your policy of unplugging poor people, will be, shall we say, irreparably damaged." Finch was pale, trembling. He was a man who dealt in threats, legal threats, financial threats. He did not know how to handle this. This was a physical, absolute reality that he could not dismiss with a memo. "What do you want?" he finally whispered, defeated. Cutter pointed to the letter on the desk. "We want you to fix what you broke. You are going to call St. Catherine's Hospital. You are going to speak to a Mysteria Henderson. You are going to inform her that account 734-B, belonging to Johnny Miller, has been canceled. Not postponed, canceled. The debt is to be considered paid in full, a charitable act from your benevolent corporation." The advocate pulled a set of papers from his briefcase. "And then you are going to sign this legally binding agreement, which states that neither you nor any of your subsidiaries will ever again attempt to collect this or any future medical debt from the Miller family. It also includes a rather substantial non-disclosure clause. For your protection, of course." Finch stared at them, his world crumbling. His power, which had seemed so absolute moments ago, was an illusion. It was built on rules and systems that these men simply ignored. They had created their own rules, their own reality, and imposed it upon him with terrifying force. And if I don't? He asked, one last flicker of defiance in his eyes. Cutter leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. If you don't, we won't hurt you, Mr. Finch. We are not animals. We are much, much more patient than that. He gestured to the window again. We will stay. We will stay for days, for weeks. We will become a permanent fixture of your skyline. Your name will become a byword for corporate evil. Every time you look out this window, you will see us. Every time you get in your car, you will see us. We will be the shadow that follows you for the rest of your life. A constant, silent reminder of the day you tried to orphan a little girl for profit. He straightened up. Or you could just make the call, and we will disappear, vanish back into the night as if we were never here. The choice is yours. Alistair Finch looked from Cutter's merciless eyes to the window, at the silent, waiting army below. He looked at the child's drawing on his desk. He saw his career, his reputation, his carefully constructed world, balanced on the edge of a knife. He collapsed into his expensive leather chair, his body shaking. He reached for the phone. Get me Henderson at St. Catherine's, he croaked to his speakerphone. Cutter smiled. The negotiation was over. Back at the hospital, Bear stood outside the door to ICU Room 4. Inside, through the small glass window, he could see Johnny Sparky Miller, still and pale but alive. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the most beautiful sound in the world. 10 of his men stood with him, a silent, solemn guard of honor in the quiet, antiseptic hallway. His phone vibrated. It was a text from Cutter. The deal is done. Paper signed. The debt is gone. A wave of profound relief washed over Bear. He closed his eyes for a moment, a silent prayer of thanks on his lips. He sent back a simple reply. Good. Bring the girl. He turned to his men. It's done, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The men nodded, their faces grim but satisfied. Justice had been served. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged and Cutter appeared, holding a sleeping Lily in his arms. He had wrapped her in another, cleaner blanket. Her face, in sleep, was peaceful, all the fear and worry erased. She looked like what she was, a child. Bear took her from Cutter's arms, holding her gently against his chest. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep, and snuggled deeper into the familiar scent of his leather vest. Let's go show her that her daddy's okay, Bear whispered. A nurse, her earlier fear replaced by a grudging respect, quietly opened the door to the ICU room for them. Bear stepped inside. The room was filled with the quiet hum and beep of machinery. He walked to the side of the bed. Lily, he said softly, gently rousing her. Wake up, little one. We're here. Lily's eyes fluttered open. She was disoriented for a moment, then her gaze fell on the man in the bed. Daddy, she whispered. He's right here, Bear said, his voice a low rumble. He's safe now. The machines are going to stay on. The doctors are going to keep helping him. Everything is going to be okay. He gently lowered her so she could sit on the edge of the bed. She immediately reached out and took her father's hand. It was warm. She squeezed it, her tiny hand lost in his. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not the tears of fear or frustration she had cried in the alley. These were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. They streamed down her cheeks as she looked from her father's peaceful face to the giant bearded man standing beside her. You fixed it? She asked, her voice choked with emotion. You fixed it, Lily, Bear corrected her gently. You were brave enough to ask for help. We just answered the call. She looked at her father again, then leaned over and laid her head on his chest, her small body rising and falling with his steady breaths. She closed her eyes, holding his hand, finally at peace. The bikers at the door watched the scene, their hardened faces softened by the profound, simple power of the moment. They had faced down threats of all kinds, rival gangs, the law, death itself, but this felt like the most important victory of their lives. Weeks turned into a month. The Iron Saints kept their promise. They maintained a constant, quiet presence at the hospital. They paid every bill, navigating the hospital's bureaucracy with a combination of the advocate's legal acumen and Rhino's intimidating glares. They brought Lily to and from the hospital every day, ensuring she was never alone. They even fixed her mother's broken-down car Sparky's old tools wielded by men who knew their sacred value. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, a miracle happened. Johnny Sparky Miller opened his eyes. He was weak, confused. The world was a blurry haze. The first thing he saw was his daughter's face, sleeping in a chair by his bed, her small hand holding his. The second thing he saw was the massive, familiar figure of Silas Bear Blackwood, sitting in the corner of the room, reading a motorcycle magazine. Bear? Sparky's voice was a dry, raspy whisper. Bear's head snapped up. He was on his feet in an instant, his face a mixture of shock and elation. He pressed the nurse's call button. Sparky, he said, his voice thick. Welcome back, brother. Sparky's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked around the room, at the machines, at his daughter, at the president of the club he had walked away from years ago. What happened? He rasped. Why are you here? He looked down at himself, at the tubes and wires. I can't pay for this. My insurance. It's handled, Bear said simply. Sparky stared at him, trying to process it. The last thing he remembered was a falling girder, a flash of pain, and then darkness. The memories of the club, of the life he had chosen to leave behind for his family, felt a lifetime away. But why? Sparky asked, his voice cracking with emotion and confusion. I walked away, Bear. I chose a different life. I'm not one of you anymore. Bear pulled the chair closer to the bed. He leaned forward, his expression serious. You never really walk away from family, Johnny. We were sorry to see you go, but we respected your choice. You chose to be a father. There's no higher calling. He paused, then gestured toward Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully. But the world, it tried to take that from you. It tried to take you from her. Bear's voice dropped, becoming low and intense. He told Sparky everything. About the debt, about the hospital's decision, about the soulless calculations of Finch Medical Solutions. And then he told him about Lily. He told him how his 7-year-old daughter, armed with nothing but a box of crayons and his own words about family and honor, had walked into the lion's den. How she had faced down a clubhouse full of hardened men, and with her courage and her faith, had reminded them all of what their patch, their code, truly meant. She came to us, Johnny, Bear said, his voice full of a gruff, paternal pride. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood there in the cold, and she demanded that we honor our code. She has more steel in her little body than half the prospects I've trained. He reached into his vest and pulled out the letter. It was worn and creased now, but he had preserved it. He handed it to Sparky. Sparky took the letter, his hands trembling. He read his daughter's words, saw her wobbly drawing of the wrench, his old mark. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. He was not just crying for his own life, but for the impossible burden his little girl had carried. She reminded us of something we had started to forget, Bear continued, his voice soft. That this, he tapped the skull and wrench patch on his vest, is not about being the baddest men on the road. It's not about territory or reputation. It's about this. It's about family. It's about drawing a line around the people you love and telling the whole damn world that they are not allowed to cross it. He looked from Sparky to the sleeping girl. Your daughter didn't just save you, Johnny. She saved us. She made us a family again. Sparky could not speak. He just clutched the letter to his chest, his body shaking with sobs of gratitude, of pride, of a love so fierce it hurt. He had tried to build a small, safe world for his daughter, away from the dangers of his past. And in the end, it was that past, that dangerous, loyal, honorable family that had saved them both. The Iron Saints did not disappear once Sparky was awake. Their adoption of the Miller family was total and absolute. They paid for every last cent of his extensive medical bills and the months of physical therapy that followed. When the hospital finally discharged him, they did not let him return to the cramped, run-down apartment he could no longer afford. They had found a new place for them, a small, clean 2-bedroom house with a little yard in a safe, quiet neighborhood. The rent was paid for the first year. The pantry was fully stocked. On the day they moved in, the entire club showed up. It was not a party, it was a barn raising. They moved furniture, they painted walls, they planted a small garden in the backyard. Rhino, the master locksmith, installed new, high-security locks on all the doors and windows. At the end of the day, as the sun was setting, Bear gathered everyone in the new living room. Sparky, leaning on a cane but standing tall, had his arm around his wife, who was crying quiet tears of joy. Lily stood in front of them, her eyes shining. Bear knelt in front of Lily. "We have something for you," he said. He held out a small, folded bundle of black leather. Lily took it and unfolded it. It was a tiny leather vest, a perfect miniature of the ones the bikers wore. It was brand new, the leather stiff and smelling wonderful. But it was not empty. On the back there was a single, beautifully embroidered patch. It was a heart, stitched in bright red thread, and inside the heart was a small silver-gray wrench. Her father's mark, inside a heart. "You are an honorary member of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club," Bear announced, his voice booming with pride. "You are the heart of this club, little one. You reminded us what we fight for." Lily's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the whole city. She looked at her father, who nodded, his own eyes wet with tears. She turned and hugged Bear's neck, whispering, "Thank you," into his beard. She shrugged on the little vest. It was the proudest she had ever felt. She looked around the room at the dozens of huge, bearded, tattooed men who were all smiling down at her. They were not scary anymore. They were her uncles, all 300 of them. She was safe. Her daddy was safe. They were home. They were family. Years passed. 5 of them. The small house with the little yard was still home. The garden in the back was flourishing, tended to by Sparky, who no longer needed a cane. The limp was almost gone, a faint reminder of the battle they had won. He did not work at construction sites anymore. He was the master mechanic and co-owner of Iron Saint Customs, the club's official workshop, a place that was more art studio than garage. His hands, once destined to waste away, were now covered in the honest grease of a man doing what he loved, surrounded by brothers he trusted. Lily was 12 now. The little girl was gone, replaced by a bright, confident young woman with her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's kind eyes. She was at the top of her class, loved to read, and could diagnose an engine knock from 50 yards away. The scene is the annual Iron Saints Club picnic, a sprawling, joyous affair held on a large piece of land the club owned by a lake. The air is thick with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter, a stark contrast to the thundering engines that are their public persona. Children, the sons and daughters of the bikers, run and play, their laughter mixing with the classic rock playing from a set of huge speakers. Lily is not playing with the younger kids. She is sitting at a picnic table with Bear, Cutter, and Rhino, a worn copy of a thick fantasy novel open in front of her. She is wearing her leather vest. It is more worn now, the leather soft and supple. It fits her perfectly. She has never outgrown it. The club has had a new one custom made for her every year on her birthday. She is arguing with Rhino about the tactical weaknesses of a dragon's underbelly, her expression serious and animated. Rhino, a man who could bench press a small car, is listening intently, nodding and offering his own, surprisingly insightful, counter-arguments. Bear watches them, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He takes a sip of his soda and looks out at the scene. He sees Sparky at the grill, laughing with Doc, flipping burgers. He sees Lily's mom talking with some of the other wives. He sees a family, a huge, loud, unconventional, and fiercely loyal family. Clears throat. "You know this story, it isn't really about motorcycles. It was never about a biker gang or the intimidating rumble of their engines. Those are just the details, the window dressing. This was a story about a promise whispered by a father to his daughter, a promise of a secret society of protectors. And it was a story about the promise a giant of a man made to a little girl in the cold, a vow that he would not let the world break her. It's a story about what happens when one small, brave voice, armed with nothing but love and a crayon, refuses to be silenced. It's about what happens when that voice, against all odds, finds the one family big enough and strong enough to hear it. We are taught so often to judge by appearances. We are taught to fear the leather and the ink, the scars and the beards, the roar of an engine in the dead of night. We build our world on assumptions, on the neat and tidy boxes we like to put people in. The good guys, the bad guys. But this story reminds us, doesn't it? It reminds us that heroes don't always wear shining armor or crisp uniforms. Sometimes heroes wear worn leather vests that smell of gasoline and road dust. Sometimes they have tattoos that tell stories of pain and survival, not of malice. Sometimes the most fearsome-looking people are the ones with the most fiercely protected hearts. And it reminds us of the most important truth of all. Family is not always about blood. It is not about the people you are born to. Family is a verb. It is an action. It is about loyalty. It is about who shows up. It is about who rides for you when your world is on fire and everyone else has turned their backs. Who was your protector? When you were small and the world seemed too big and too cruel, who was the person who stood like a mountain between you and the storm? Was it a parent, a teacher, a friend? Maybe it was a stranger who showed you a moment of kindness you never forgot. Tell us in the comments below. Let's fill this space with stories of the heroes in our own lives. Because the lesson of Lily and the Iron Saints is not just something to be watched, it is something to be lived. In your own life, you have a choice. You can be the indifferent passerby, or you can be the one who stops. You can be the one who hears the small voice that needs help. You have the power to be a protector. You have the power to be family to someone who has none. If you believe in that power, if you believe that a family is forged in loyalty, and that heroes are defined by their actions, not their appearance, then ride with us. Stand with the Gentle Biker family. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a community that believes in protecting its own.